Well, joining us now from Wisconsin is, of course, the governor of that great state, Scott Walker. Welcome back to the program. It seems like we kicked this thing off about 3 weeks ago, a month and a half ago, Governor Walker.
You did, yeah, a little bit more than a month ago, and you were the first to talk about it. And I said it's amazing for something that at its heart is about reform. It's about protecting middle-class jobs and equally, if not of greater importance, middle-class taxpayers, because your listeners appreciate this. For years, government has grown larger and larger and larger, and the largesse has been balanced on the backs of middle-class taxpayers. And we said enough is enough. The voters elected us to do this last November. We're doing what we said we were going to do, and every step of the way, first it was 14 senators leaving for 3 weeks, something this week when I was across the river from you in Hudson. I said to a bunch of great guys, blue-collar workers at Empire Bucket, a manufacturing company for large-scale buckets on the front of digging equipment. I said to these guys, "Can you imagine what would happen if you were missing from work for 3 weeks? At best, you'd be disciplined. In most cases, you'd be terminated." They tried to do that. There was an alternative out there because overwhelmingly the middle-class taxpayers in our state said, "Get this done, move forward, get back to business, helping the private sector create jobs." And again, you've got another step here in the very liberal Dane County, which is kind of like Greenwich Village out in New York, where they tried to do something again. And I'm not a lawyer, but the lawyers that were in court today tell me that the judge ignored any reference to the case law they cited, and they didn't have to ignore the case law on the other side because there is no case law that they cited, and instead seemed predetermined to have set her position even before she came in the courtroom. But
well, I've got a copy of the open meetings laws in front of me, and it does say public notice of every meeting shall be given 24 hours before commencement, unless it is impossible or impracticable, then 2 hours, which of course was given. But more importantly, it said when it comes to legislative meetings that particular requirement would be exempt if it conflicts with the rules of the Senate. Well, I got news for the judge. The Senate makes its own rules, not the judicial branch of government. That is, if she didn't learn that in law school, she didn't get her money's worth. So
and the rules, as you just mentioned, that's in the statutes. That's not just a rule. That's in the statutes.
Right.
The rules themselves, which were interpreted by the Senate chief clerk, a guy who's worked for majorities of Democrats and then Republicans and then Democrats and Republicans again. So obviously a guy who must be playing it straight, because if both Democrats and Republicans have kept him in the Senate, he clearly noticed them on that. He explained that. He explained it beforehand. He explained it after the vote was taken. It is very clear at the end. The law is on the side of the legislature on this, and more importantly, the law is on the side of what we passed. It will become the law. The question is, how many more legal obstacles are they going to put in the way? But in the end,
well, you could go back, Governor. You could go back right now and repass the thing with 24 hours notice, but there's a principle here, and the principle is this is judicial activism, and you're going to appeal it and have this judge, and you didn't say this, I did, but have this judge put in her place.
Well, in the end, the law is clear. Judges are not there to make law. The law has been on the books and the statutes that reference the Senate rules, and you very articulately explained exactly what's going on in terms of the law and the rules of the state Senate. What ultimately, in a larger context, is going on is they'll go to any lengths. I mean, you had the big labor union bosses coming in from Washington, D.C., bringing in, we've seen this last week, the report of $3.7 million worth of TV that's been bought in the last month. And they realize that they'll do anything to stop this from happening. And the reality is, the first week this happened, when we introduced the bill and I was on the show talking about it, I talked about how we need to do this to balance the budget and how this was ultimately very reasonable, bold politically, but reasonable and modest in terms of we're asking for 5.8% for pension, 12.6% for health care insurance. The irony is if you ask any middle-class taxpayer out there, they're paying a whole lot more for the retirement if they have a retirement plan, and by and large, at least in Wisconsin, we're paying about 20% on average for the middle class. The interesting thing is it then shifted to collective bargaining, which can only happen. These reforms can only happen if we change collective bargaining in the state. And for all the hype and the banter from even the President of the United States, ignoring the fact that his own federal government does not have collective bargaining for their employees other than the Postal Service for pension or for benefits or for base salary. There is no collective bargaining there. That's not the case at the federal level, and yet they're acting like it's the end of the world here. The reality is the federal money, the money from Washington's come in because, more than anything, they don't want to protect the money of the workers. They want their hands on the union dues, and we actually give workers the right to choose
whether or not
they're going to have to be a part of the union.
Let's explain that. That's crucial. The two provisions of this plan that the unions are really terrified of. A, you don't have to join. It's not a de facto closed shop. If you don't want to join and pay the dues, you don't have to from now on if you work for a government agency. And B, they can't take the dues for political campaigning against your will like they've been doing, notwithstanding the Beck decision. And all of a sudden, if you take away this legal monopoly that the unions have in government from taking my money and then using that to elect people I don't support to keep the gravy train rolling, why they're going to have to make their case in an open and fair way, and the unions don't want that.
That's exactly right. They want their hands on the workers' money, not to protect workers. Because remember, a week after we introduced this bill, several of the labor union bosses came out and said, you know what? After a week of telling you the world would come to an end, how our members couldn't afford to pay 5% and 12% respectively for pension and health care, now amazingly they said, now they didn't really mean it because their local unions in the past 3 weeks have passed since this have all been running out to settle contracts without a pension or health care contribution, but they said, if you take them at their word, that they would accept the 5 and the 12. What happened in that week? It wasn't that they actually thought people could handle it. It was because that was never the argument in the first place. It was they did not want to concede that workers should have the right of their own to choose. And when they do that, they're worried that they wouldn't be able to make a compelling case. That's where they get their hands on the money. They're worried about the money, but not the workers' money. It's the money that go into not only the statewide, but the international DC-based unions out there. And that's really at the heart of it. And it's why they're trying so hard, because they know if we can make the case that this is about protecting the middle class taxpayers and middle class workers in Wisconsin, we can make the case anywhere in the country.
Unions, ever since day one in this pension reform battle, going back to Chris Christie, who's trying to do the same thing in New Jersey, the state of Michigan, they have now boosted the power to reform pensions, to reform the wages and benefits of local employees that might be putting more pressure on middle-class families. Whenever you get into these debates, it's always management versus labor, big guy versus little guy. This really isn't the case. This is about the bailout culture versus market incentives. Nobody's against collective bargaining, not Scott Walker, not Jason Lewis. In the private sector, you've got market discipline. But what the American people are tired of is bailing out corporations and bailing out now labor unions. And that, Governor Walker, seems to be the big debate that nobody's talking about. That is, this is just the latest bailout. And what the labor unions want, what Democrats want after the bailouts of everybody else during the last couple of years, including business, is now a bailout of big labor.
Well, that's exactly right. And who does it come on the backs of? It comes on the backs of middle-class taxpayers.
Right.
I mean, these are the folks who, year after year, particularly not only at the state but at the local level, when government in the past had to deal with deficits. In our case, in Wisconsin, we got a $3.6 billion deficit because past politicians failed to live up to making the tough decisions, so they just punted it 2 years ahead to the next budget. Well, we got nowhere to punt it to, nor should we. We've actually done something remarkable. We have a credit positive budget according to the National Bond Rating Agencies because we dealt with our structural deficit in this budget, so that we're not passing it on to our kids. But what they want is to do what they did 2 years ago, grab some more of the bailout stimulus money, use it for one-time money for a long-term fix, and only make the problem worse. Well, again, the public can't take it. We can't take higher taxes and only drive people out of jobs and it'll drive people out of their homes. And we certainly can't pass it on to local governments because without the tools to fix it, they're going to be stuck either raising taxes or laying off people, and those people will be middle-class taxpayers as well. This is truly, in the best sense of the word, what we're doing is progressive. Other states are looking at massive cuts because of their deficits, but they're looking to either make it up through layoffs or property tax or overall tax increases. That's the wrong approach when you've got such a tough economy. We're doing something that's truly progressive and innovative.
Well, I think Milwaukee's Milwaukee's a great microcosm. You have written about that in the Journal, Wall Street Journal, and elsewhere. But the fact is, the school district in Milwaukee will either lay a bunch of people off, drastically raise taxes, even further hurting that tough city right now, or with this particular bill, have the power to go in and tell a Milwaukee school teacher whose total compensation package is now over $100,000 and contributes nothing to their health care plan, instead of laying off a bunch of people, why don't you contribute something? What you do is you give the flexibility to local government that's much needed, but the unions don't want that.
Well, exactly, because in the end, they want everybody to be treated the same. The other benefit is not only the financial, it's not only the budget savings, it makes government better. I mean, I mentioned that Wall Street Journal article, not only the 100,000+, the total compensation package, but the fact that a year ago, when they were making cutbacks because of the previous administration cutting aid without giving them any tools, who was one of the first people laid off? It was a young woman who got the Outstanding New Teacher of the Year award for the entire state. A week later, she gets a layoff notice. Why? Because her union, her collective bargaining agreement from her union mandates that hiring and firing is based on seniority, not based on things like performance and merit. When we change this, when these reforms are fully enacted, not only will it save our budget at the state level and save our budget at the local level, prevent massive layoffs, but most importantly, it'll make government work better. And isn't that really ultimately what people want us to do? Make it work better.
So the unions obfuscate and big labor. And remember, they spent $400 million to get the president and the vice president elected. So the vice president goes on bended knee the other day to big labor and promises to do anything they want. Profile and courage, he is not. But they want to obfuscate the issue. But the issue boils down to this. When you've got, for instance, your neighboring state, Illinois, with $82 billion in the hole in their unfunded pension promises.
Right.
As you point out, the state right now, without pension reform, has three options. You can massively raise taxes. You can engage in massive layoffs, where, as you point out, the last in is the first out, and sometimes the best teachers are the best workers. Or the third option is what you're trying to do. You can reform collective bargaining and pensions so that local governments and state governments have flexibility to lay people off on the basis of merit, to, in fact, trim some benefits so that more people can stay employed, to keep the lid on taxes. So it's one of those three options. You have massive layoffs and the best people get laid off, or massive tax increases, or the Walker approach. That's it.
Right, and it's the reforms we're talking about that, in the end, really, again, they're bold in politics. But where else in the world would they be bold? Nowhere, because in the private sector, employers over the last couple of years have worked with their employees and said, tough economy, tough times, we're going to get through it, but we want to preserve jobs. And so people have said, hey, freeze my retirement, freeze my 401k in most cases, not a pension. Yeah, I'll pay a little bit more for my health care. Yeah, I'll take a pay freeze. If I'm going to keep my coworker working, people have been willing to do that. And the amazing thing is, not from the unions, but from a lot of the workers, we've been hearing that along the way. That's what this is all about. It's about common sense. But, the next step after these legal challenges is they're going to go after 8 of those brave Republican senators and try and do recalls. All of them need to be sustained, not only for Wisconsin, but for the entire country. One of them is just across the river in
Sheila?
In the northwest portion of Wisconsin. Sheila Harsdorf.
Sheila, yeah, we got to save Sheila. Thanks, Governor Walker, so much.